The roar inside Shea Stadium on August 15, 1965, wasn't just sound, it was pressure, a physical force that pressed against the ribs of everyone present. 55,000 voices fused into one continuous scream, a wall of white noise so dense that the Beatles themselves could barely hear their own amplifiers. The field lights burned hot, turning the diamond dirt into a glaring stage, and out there in the sea of waving arms and tear-streaked faces stood four young men who looked impossibly small against the enormity of what they'd become. They had opened with "Whist and Shout," John Lennon's voice already hoarse from the afternoon press conference and the helicopter ride in. Then, "She's a Woman," Paul's bass thumping like a heartbeat under the chaos. "I Feel Fine" followed, George's guitar riff cutting through like a knife, though few in the crowd could distinguish one note from another. By the time they reached "Help," the fifth song, their set was barely 20 minutes old, yet exhaustion already etched lines around their eyes. They were 20-something gods playing 30-minute sets because longer would have been impossible. The screaming never stopped, the PA system fought a losing battle, and security kept having to fish fainted girls from the crush at the front. Paul was center stage, leaning into the microphone, his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. The lyric, "When I was younger, so much younger than today," had just left his lips when his gaze drifted downward, past the police line, past the photographers crouched like hunters, and locked on her. She stood pressed against the metal barrier, not jumping, not waving a sign, not even screaming. Just standing. A girl of perhaps 16, dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail, wearing a faded blue sweater that looked too warm for the August night. Her arms were wrapped around a small, silver portable tape recorder, the kind families bought for vacations, bulky and earnest. Tears ran down her face in steady, silent streams, carving clean paths through the grime and excitement sweat that dusted every cheek in the front rows. She wasn't hysterical. She was broken in a way that made the frenzy around her seem suddenly childish. Paul's voice cracked on the next word, "I," and stopped altogether. The band felt it instantly. John's rhythm guitar stumbled, a sour chord hanging in the air. George's lead line trailed off into feedback. Ringo's hi-hat stuttered once, twice, then silence from the drums. Only the amplifiers hummed, and far off, the crowd's roar began to fracture as people realized something was wrong. Paul lowered the microphone slowly, as though afraid to startle her further. He crouched at the edge of the platform, elbows on his knees, peering down through the glare. The spotlight operator, sensing the shift, swung the beam toward the barrier, catching her in a pool of white light. She blinked, startled, but didn't look away. "You," Paul said, and his voice, unamplified now, yet somehow carrying because the stadium had begun to hush in pockets, sounded small and human. "The girl in the blue sweater. Why are you crying?" A ripple moved through the front rows. Heads turned. Whispers spread backward like wind through wheat. Someone nearby reached out to touch her shoulder, but she shook her head, eyes fixed on Paul. She lifted the recorder higher, as if it explained everything. It's not for me," she said. Her voice was thin, almost lost, but the sudden quiet around her amplified it. "My brother. Tommy. He's 9. He has leukemia." The word came out like a confession, heavy and final. "The doctors say he won't see Christmas. Maybe not even Halloween." Fresh tears welled, but she kept going. "He loves you. More than anything in the world. He plays your records until the grooves wear smooth. Help is his favorite, he says it makes him feel like someone's listening. But he couldn't come tonight. He can't even sit up some days. The treatments make him so sick. So I come instead. Every show I can get tickets for. I record it all. So when I get home, I play it for him in his room. He closes his eyes and pretends he's here. Pretend you're singing just for him." The silence now was almost complete in the forward sections. Even the screaming farther back had begun to falter as word traveled in waves. A girl beside her started crying too, softly. A boy in a Beatles cap wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Paul's face changed. The practiced smile vanished. His mouth opened, closed. He looked back over his shoulder at the others. John had already taken off his guitar. He stood motionless, staring down at the girl, his usual irony gone. George's shoulders slumped, he rubbed a hand across his mouth. Ringo sat frozen behind the kit, sticks limp in his hands. Paul stood slowly. He spoke into the microphone again, voice rougher now. "Tommy," he repeated, tasting the name. Then, louder, "This one's for Tommy." He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. The band snapped back into formation without a word. But they didn't pick up where they'd left off. Paul counted them in softly, for gentle clicks of his tongue, and they began, "Help," again. Slower. Stripped back. No frills, no showmanship. Just the song, raw and deliberate, every word placed like a promise. Paul sang it directly to her, eyes never leaving her face. John's harmony came in softer than usual, almost tender. George's fills were sparse, mournful. Ringo kept the beat simple, steady, like a heartbeat monitoring a fragile patient. She pressed the record button again. Her hands shook so badly the machine rattled against her chest, but she held it high, capturing every note, every breath. Tears streamed freely down her face now, but a small, trembling smile broke through, like sunlight after days of rain. When the last chord faded, held longer than on the record, ringing out over the field, the silence lasted 3 full heartbeats. Then the applause started. Not the frenzied explosion of before, but something deeper, rolling, almost reverent. It built slowly, section by section, until the entire stadium seemed to exhale together. Paul knelt at the edge again. He reached down. Farther than security liked, until his fingers brushed hers. Gently, he took the recorder from her trembling hands. The crowd watched, breath held. He pressed the record button once more, leaned close to the built-in microphone, and spoke directly into it. "Tommy, lad, this is Paul McCartney. And John, George, and Ringo are right here with me. We're all thinking of you tonight, mate. We know you're fighting hard. Keep fighting, yeah. We're sending every bit of love we have. And when you're stronger, when the doctors say it's time, you come see us. Front row. On us. I promise." His voice cracked on the last word. He cleared his throat, handed the recorder back with infinite care. Their fingers touched, brief, electric. She clutched the machine to her heart like it now held something sacred. Paul stood. He looked at her a moment longer, then turned to the band. They exchanged glances, wordless, exhausted, moved. John gave a small nod. George wiped his face quickly with his sleeve. Ringo tapped the cymbal once, softly, like punctuation. They launched into "Ticket to Ride" next, but the energy had shifted. The songs that followed felt different, less like performance, more like shared breathing. The crowd sang along where they could, quieter now, as though afraid to shatter whatever fragile thing had just happened. She stayed there until the end, recorder pressed tight, tears drying on her cheeks. When the final notes of "I'm Down" rang out and the Beatles waved their goodbyes, Paul lingering longest at the edge, looking back toward her spot, she turned and began pushing through the crowd toward the exits. People parted for her without being asked. Some reached out to touch her arm, not possessively, but gently, as though she carried something holy. Outside, under the sodium lights of the parking lot, she walked quickly toward the subway, the recorder warm against her skin. She didn't know yet that Tommy would live another 18 months, long enough to hear that tape 1,000 times, long enough to smile when Paul said his name, long enough for the family to frame the moment as proof that miracles sometimes wore guitars and mop tops. And the Beatles never spoke publicly of that night in quite the same way again. But in dressing rooms and hotel rooms for years afterward, one of them would occasionally murmur, "Remember the girl at Shea? The one with the recorder?" And the others would nod, eyes distant, remembering how, for 4 minutes in the middle of the loudest night of their lives, the world had shrunk to the size of one small, dying boy's bedroom.